With some NBA injuries forcing players to miss time or even end their career, these NBA injuries nearly ended players' lives. Most Celtics fans will be able to tell you how devastated they were in 2017 when Gordon Hayward had dislocated his ankle. The incident took place in the first minutes of the Celtics season opener against the Cavaliers. Kyrie Irving had lobbed an alley-oop pass to Hayward, which then led Hayward to land awkwardly on his leg, which collapsed under his weight. His ankle then contorted into a gross fashion. It would later be revealed that Hayward's tibia had been fractured, along with the dislocation of his entire ankle. After receiving his first surgery, it was ruled that Hayward would be ruled out for the entire season. Following the injury, Hayward was almost immediately supported by his fellow NBA players on Twitter. Both Paul George and Sean Livingston, who had also suffered from season-ending injuries, sent their prayers. George saying, "God bless you, bro. Help him get through this, God." Livingston sent his support by saying, "Only God has all the answers." Months had gone by since his first surgery, which had left him with plates and screws inside his ankle to recover. However, another complication came about when his tendons were being irritated because of them. The irritation was enough to merit another surgery in the region that would now remove those screws. Hayward remained optimistic about the entire ordeal, saying, "Honestly, I looked at it as a good thing more than anything, because when you introduce foreign objects into your body, anything can happen at any time. Sometimes your body rejects it or things happen. You get infections, and it could happen a year or years down the road. So it's nice to know that I'm done with the plate and screws now, and that is not something I'm gonna have to worry about in the future." Nearly a year after his initial incident, Hayward was able to play in the Celtics season opener of the 2018-19 season on October 16th, where he scored 10 points in 25 minutes. While the vast majority of season-ending injuries tend to be on accident, however, there is at least one instance where it was intended. In an event that is known to the NBA as the punch. It took place in a matchup against the Rockets and Lakers in 1977. Lakers guard Norm Nixon had just missed a shot which prompted Houston's Kevin Coonard and Lakers' Kermit Washington to aggressively fight for the rebound. It would be Coonard that would win out the rebound to reset the play and subsequently pass the ball out. Seeing the incident was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who wrestled with Coonard for being so physical while his teammate Washington watched from afar. After Coonard and Jabbar finished fighting, Washington grabbed Coonard, who then elbowed Washington in the arm. A new scuffle between Coonard and Washington began to break out until Rudy Tomjanovich of the Rockets came sprinting to break up the fight. Washington believed Tomjanovich had been sprinting at him to attack him, so he unleashed a short right arm jab to Tomjanovich's face. Between the strength of Washington's punch and the speed Tomjanovich had been running at him, left Tomjanovich's face disfigured as he fell to the ground. Making matters worse, Tomjanovich fell to the ground, which also made his head bounce off the court floor, which left him in a pool of blood. The sound was reported to have been heard in the arena, and Jabbar would later state it was similar to the sound of a watermelon falling on the ground. It was later found that Tomjanovich's face had been completely fractured to the point his bones from his face had completely detached themselves from the skull. The fracture then caused Tomjanovich to suffer from a concussion along with a broken jaw. However, that had not even been the worst of it. Blood and spinal fluid made their way into his skull, which then leaked into his face and mouth. Tomjanovich is one of very few people to know what spine fluid tastes like. The doctor who worked on Tomjanovich's face compared fixing his face to scotch taping a shattered eggshell together. Tomjanovich went on to make a full recovery after missing 5 months from the league. Later in his life, Tomjanovich talked about Washington, who had since served prison time for unrelated crimes, saying, "I feel sorry for him. I know Kermit. We had made up after that incident, and I know he was trying to make it like anybody. And I feel for the guy. I hadn't spoken to him in a couple of years. I wish him the best." Coming into the league as the 22nd pick of the Celtics in the 1987 draft, Reggie Lewis could have been selected to be with a better team. Joining up with the talents of legend Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish, Lewis was to be surrounded by the league's best to learn under. Quickly filling into his role by the early 1990s, Lewis had become a Celtic star, averaging over 20 points a game with over 4 rebounds and 3 assists. Lewis seemed to be showing no signs of slowing down until during a playoff game he suddenly collapsed. After being rushed to the hospital, it was found Lewis had cardiomyopathy. The fairly common but deadly disease that affects the heart's functions is one that Lewis likely inherited and now is at 27 years old beginning to surface. In denial, Lewis quickly switched hospitals and doctors against the suggestion of the 11 cardiologists who had originally diagnosed him. A week of further additional tests conducted once again by another doctor who ultimately came up with the conclusion that Lewis had instead been suffering from an alternatively benign neurological condition that caused the initial crash. Sending Lewis back to the court, Dr. Gilbert Mudge solely prescribed the aid of some medicine to help him with his condition. The conflicting opinions quickly drew controversy within the Boston medical staff, who were right to agree with the original diagnoses of the team of cardiologists. Despite all this, Lewis still felt he was in stable enough condition to practice shooting at a nearby Boston court. At 5 p.m., it had been noticed by a security cam supervisor that Lewis had slumped down to the ground after speaking to a group of fellow players at the courts. One player had been a medical student at Brandeis University, who had been the first to find that Lewis had no pulse. She attempted to revive Lewis while an ambulance was en route, but to no avail. Lewis was rushed to the hospital, where 2 hours later, he was pronounced dead due to cardiac arrest. Needless to say, it had been the original diagnosis by the team of cardiologists that had been right all along, and now Lewis had unfortunately paid the price. His death still remains controversial, as it has been speculated that Lewis, like many other players during the time, may have been using performance-enhancing drugs, which may have caused his heart complications. After being selected to play in the training camp roster for the U.S. national team in 2014, Paul George suffered a gruesome ankle injury. The U.S. team had been playing a scrimmage in Las Vegas when George was running down James Harden's fast break attempt. When Harden jumped for the shot, George followed by attempting to block the shot, but instead fouled him. As George was landing on the ground, his right leg and ankle got caught underneath the basket's pillar, which then caused his ankle to snap. George was immediately stretched off the court. It was later announced by head coach Mike Krzyzewski that the game would not continue out of respect for George and his family. The injury was discovered to have been a compound fracture of both bones in his lower right leg. George went into emergency surgery, where a pin was placed in his leg. He reflected upon the injury, saying, "I missed the block, I didn't get the ball. But then I came down and it was just awkward. I didn't really feel nothing then. I just knew I couldn't put my foot down. I couldn't help myself from standing. Why can't I stand right now? Then I saw my bone. The second I saw my bone, I lost it. I just laid flat. I felt like I was immortal. I was invincible. I made so many plays where guys go down and I walked up clean from it. I did feel that nothing bad could ever happen to me on the court. The pain was tough. As soon as the air hit my bone where the open wound was, it just shot through my whole body. Everything just slowed down, like I could hear every individual in the arena talking." Many had been convinced the injury would likely mean George would miss the rest of the season. However, he managed to make a recovery in just 6 months. With the injury having taken place on August 1st, George played in his first NBA game since the incident on April 5th. In the matchup against the Miami Heat, George, with limited play, was able to land 13 points with just 15 minutes of action. Another head injury coming from just this season occurred during a matchup between the Boston Celtics and Denver Nuggets. Late in the second quarter, Kemba Walker attempted to pick off a high-traffic bounce pass where he stumbled and rammed his head into the stomach of teammate Semi Ojeleye. The hit had been hard enough to immediately knock Walker to the ground as a timeout was called. Walker quickly got into the fetal position as medical personnel prepared a stretcher to wheel him off. After arriving at a Denver hospital, it was later announced that all tests done had indicated Walker had been suffering from concussion-like symptoms. Luckily, after being checked out, in-house staff were able to definitively determine it had just been a neck sprain. However, given the location of the injury, Walker would have to ease very slowly back into his normal regimen. Celtics head coach Brad Stevens later spoke of the incident, saying, "It's always scary. The head injuries, the neck injuries are scary, and that's the reason he's doubtful, to be honest. I think he could probably play with the strain part. We want to make sure with the way he hit, and certainly because of the sensitivity to head injuries. Obviously, they went through a series of things with the Denver doctors and a series of things when he got back yesterday with our doctors. And so he is continuing to be monitored in case any of that stuff shows up. But he's been good and he feels good. It's kind of a minor miracle based on what we saw the other day. But the strain is real and he's got some soreness in his back and neck. That's it. He's doing really good. He didn't practice, so he went through a number of progressions upstairs on the bike and in the weight room. We're just really lucky it didn't end up being near as bad as it could have been." There can be nothing more stressful for a franchise than those long minutes of the unknown following a star player's injury on the court. No team knows this any better than the Golden State Warriors, who during the 2015 Western Conference Finals nearly lost Steph Curry from a head injury. The injury occurred during the final minutes of the second quarter as Curry chased down Rockets forward Trevor Ariza on a fast break attempt. Under the basket, Ariza faked a layup, which caused Curry, who had by then already jumped in anticipation for a shot, to fall over Ariza's head. Curry's body flipped over the shoulders of Ariza, landing on his head. Curry rolled over with his hands over his head as he writhed in pain. Medical staff quickly entered the scene to assist Curry on a stretcher, although he eventually rose to walk on his own out of the